Any of you who remember Yes Minister will know the famous episode on opinion polling, where Sir Humphrey goes through how you get the right answer according to the questions you ask. And this is important to bear in mind with the two recent opinion polls on Brexit. The first was by More in Common, a group that is a campaigning organisation as well as a polling organisation. That's not to say that it doesn't follow the proper codes of conduct in its polls, but it does have a campaigning element within it, and obviously wants to use its polling to further its ambitions as a campaigning organisation. So it came up with a figure that 52% of people want to remain in the European Union. This has been used as a reason for saying we need to be closer, we need the reset to work, and so on. But it is fundamentally and obviously bogus. You cannot remain in an organisation that you have left. There is no option that you could put on a ballot paper saying, do you want to remain? The question would be, do you want to rejoin? And rejoin is fundamentally different from remain. Why? Because if you want to rejoin, you have to accept a different European Union from the one we left. Not one that now regulates AI, which it wasn't doing when we voted to leave, but one that requires new members to join the euro, something the British have absolutely no desire to do, but also one where our contributions would not be capped and not subject to a rebate, so we'd be paying in even more billions than we did when we voted to leave. And that's made worse by the fact that the EU budget has increased. So a bogus question got a bogus answer. 52% wanted to remain, but that is simply not an option. The second poll, to my mind, is much more interesting, carried out on behalf of Queen Mary University by Richard Johnson. Richard, interestingly, is not a Conservative. He's not a Reform supporter. He is a supporter of the Labour Party, so carrying it out from very different political background to mine, found what people thought not about Brexit, but about who governs. Who do people want to be ruled by? Do they want to be ruled by themselves, by international institutions, or by a combination, by a gentle collaboration between this country and partners globally? Well, the results are absolutely striking and the polling extremely rigorous. In many polls, the don't knows are taken out of it, which gives sometimes a very spurious level of accuracy to the figures because the numbers effectively get reallocated. This poll left the don't knows in. So when you take the example where 71% of people were in favour of UK government control, and you then see how many don't knows, you find that those in favour of overseas control or collaboration are tiny. So let's work through what they asked about, what they were interested in, what the questions were. The questions covered a whole gamut of matters of state. They covered fishing, they covered food safety standards, environmental issues, they covered VAT, they covered environmental questions, whole range of things that governments have to decide, 20 in all. And over 4,000 people were part of this survey. 2,200 were asked every single one of the questions, and each question was asked in batches of 10 to the people who were participants. And in every single case, a plurality was in favour of the UK government being in control. In 17 of the 20 issues, an actual majority was in favour of people having UK domestic control. That is to say, 50% plus said they wanted to be decided by the UK government, not by foreign governments or by foreign governments in collaboration. And this is fascinating because you have the poll saying 52% wanted to remain in the European Union. You then have the overwhelming majority saying that they want VAT decided by the UK. Well, VAT is not decided by the UK if you're a member of the European Union. The two are completely opposite to each other, they're indeed contradictory. And within this majority, strongly in favour of domestic control, you found that it applied across the board. So if you thought of Greens, you think the Greens, they're very pro-international collaboration, even if they don't want it decided at the EU level, surely, because they're pro-environmental and that's an international issue, they'd be in favour of international collaboration. Not a bit of it. In 11 out of the 20, even people who voted Green were in favour of UK domestic control. What about Remainers? You'd expect Remainers, the ones who said they'd like to be back in the European Union, in the other poll, the majority of them, an overwhelming majority of them, wanted independence of decision-making in all these areas. Of the Liberals, Liberal Party, Lib Dems, famous for their pro-Europeanism, in 16 out of the 20 questions, the Lib Dems wanted UK government control. Labour voters just slightly behind, 15 out of 20. And this is really fundamentally important because it ties in with the reset and it ties in with the whole concept of Brexit. The reset is going against what the British people want. The Labour Party thinks that cozying up to Brussels is the right thing to do, that allowing Brussels to set food safety standards, allowing Brussels to determine our fishing quotas is a good idea, allowing Brussels to set our environmental regulations is a good idea. It's not. The British people rejected it in the referendum, but they still reject it today in opinion polling. They want the British government to make choices for itself. And you do begin to think that the British political elite must have Stockholm syndrome, that for so long they weren't allowed to make decisions that they now don't dare do it. They don't want to do it. They want to delegate it because they have no confidence in their own decision-making. So Labour is making a mistake with the reset. But there's more than that, because what about the Conservatives? Well, I'm afraid at the end of our period in office, we made similar mistakes. It was a terrible error not to proceed with the retained EU law bill, which I got as far as its first reading. I had responsibility for it when I was working for both Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. And then it was gutted by the government that came in afterwards. Its powers were not used. Instead of getting rid of all EU law rules and putting in place our own basic common law understanding for regulation, we just took away rules that were already OTOs. It was a huge missed opportunity to get the benefits from Brexit. And then there was the disgraceful Windsor framework, which leaves Northern Ireland as a satrapy, as a colony of the European Union, subject to its regulations without any proper democratic control. So it's the politicians who have failed by not responding to what the voters demanded. And this applies across so many policy areas. The voters have decided that the people they hold to account should be making decisions, not people in a faraway country or in a faraway bureaucracy in a remote, unaccountable place. They want it decided here, and the politicians have shied away from it. And that's what this poll shows needs to be reversed. British governments need to show some backbone, some mettle, some determination to decide things for the British people. That's what the mandate is there for. And the poll has showed this is popular not just with your Brexit voter. That's why it was so important that this poll didn't actually mention Brexit, because as soon as you mention Brexit, people would give answers that they would think would fit in with how they'd voted in 2016 or what they thought should happen now. Whereas when you ask the underlying question, you see what the true level of support for domestic sovereignty, self-determination is. And this matters because it shows the government that efforts to get us back into the EU by stealth will be unpopular and unsuccessful. Why? Because the British people expect them to be deciding it. And that's fundamental, that they will be failing, they will be letting down the people who voted for them if they shy away from this difficult decision-making. And that's the truth. Decision-making is not easy. When you pay Peter, you may have to rob Paul. You may have to do things that are unpopular in certain quarters. And for decades, British governments could get away by saying, well, we didn't like this. We didn't want to do it. It's those nasty people in Brussels. Blame them. Since Brexit, that is not the case. And this poll shows that people actually are accepting of it being decided domestically. And they're not stupid. They know that consequences will flow from that, and that because of that, domestic decision-making will be properly accountable. So it seems to me it's really very simple. Because of the failures of governments since we left the European Union, People are nervous about the name of Brexit. I accept that that is true. But the problem is not that they want to be ruled by Brussels. They just want governments to get on and make decisions, and decisions that will improve their standard of living and make their lives better. And that trying to delegate those decisions to other bodies will be seen as a cop-out rather than as a sensible way forward. The British electorate have much more confidence in Britain than the politicians do. And ultimately, if the politicians don't do what the electorate want, you can always find new politicians there to a penny. I know, I'm one of them. There are plenty of us, plenty willing to serve, but we have to respond, we have to be responsive. And it's wonderfully reassuring that our great and patriotic nation wants us to do it for ourselves and doesn't want to be told what to do. If you want to read more about this, I've put a piece up on Substack that's free for everybody to read. You just need to subscribe to Substack, which is also free. So all sorts of free things going today. Thank you for listening.